The silence from Washington right now is louder than any bomb. Welcome to Money Teacher. This is Harry, your host. So, where global events meet real consequences, you are watching a divorce, not a trade dispute, not a diplomatic spat, a divorce. And like every divorce, this one is about who gets the house, who gets the kids, and who gets destroyed when the lawyers walk out. Donald Trump just made the worst calculation of his political life. He looked north. He saw a friendly neighbor. He saw a country that apologizes when you step on its foot. He saw 40 million people spread across a frozen wasteland who need America to survive. He was wrong. And right now in Ottawa, Mark Carney is proving exactly how wrong by doing something no Canadian leader has ever done. He's not fighting back. He's not retaliating. He's not even angry. He's just rooting. And when he finishes, the United States will be smaller, not just economically, geopolitically, permanently. Let me show you the papers on his desk. The moment the floor dropped at 2 a.m. Eastern, Trump signed an order. 25% tariffs on everything crossing the Canadian border. Oil, lumber, cars, aluminum, uranium, everything. His advisors were stunned. Not because it was aggressive. Trump is always aggressive. They were stunned because it was stupid. The goal was simple. Panic. Crash the Canadian dollar. Force bank runs. Make Carney beg for a meeting at Mar-a-Lago by lunch. That's the Trump playbook. Create chaos. Sell the solution. Extract concessions from people too disoriented to negotiate. It's worked 100 times on companies, on individuals, on smaller countries. But here's what Trump forgot. Canada isn't smaller. Canada is different. At 8:01 a.m., Carney walked to a podium in Ottawa. No teleprompter, no notes, no anger. He didn't even mention the tariffs. Instead, he said 7 words that just rewired the global economy. We are activating the Strategic Resource Protocol. The room went silent. Reporters looked at each other. What protocol? Canada doesn't have a protocol. Canada has politeness and hockey and universal health care. They were wrong. Carney just announced that Canada is immediately redirecting its critical mineral exports, lithium, cobalt, uranium, rare earth elements away from United States supply chains and interlocked exclusive 10-year contracts with the European Union and Japan. He didn't fight the tariff. He didn't challenge it legally. He didn't call Trump names. He just made the tariff irrelevant. Think about the geometry of that move. Trump threw a rock, Carney dropped a mountain, not on Trump, on the supply chains Trump's donors actually depend on. And here's the part that's going to keep Wall Street awake tonight. Carney had this ready. He's been sitting on this weapon since January, waiting, watching, letting Trump believe he was in control. Trump finally crossed a line he didn't even know existed, and now the floor just dropped out from under the White House. Receipt number 1. The market realization. Look at the charts from this morning's opening bell. Ford, GM, Tesla, Apple. They didn't dip. They tumbled. The algorithms caught it before the humans did. Within seconds of Carney's announcement, quantitative trading models recalculated every assumption about North American manufacturing. The results were catastrophic. Why? Because Canada isn't just a nice neighbor. Canada is the supply closet for American industry. The United States doesn't manufacture anything without Canadian components. Cars cross the border 7 times before final assembly. The electricity grid is physically integrated. You can't power Detroit without Ontario. Defense contractors source their most sensitive materials from Canadian mines. When Carney announced that critical minerals were being prioritized for reliable partners, code for not the United States, the algorithms instantly calculated the replacement cost. If American companies have to source battery metals from China or the Democratic Republic of Congo instead of Canada, their costs go up by 30 to 40%. Not because of tariffs, because of logistics, because of reliability, because of ethical certification, because of shipping lanes that pass through pirate zones. The market realized in seconds what Trump hasn't realized in 4 years. You need Canada more than Canada needs you. This is the asymmetry that breaks the American mind. Receipt number 2, the Port of Vancouver. We have satellite data. We have shipping manifests. We have photographs taken from commercial aircraft at 35,000 ton. The Port of Vancouver usually moves a massive flow of goods south by rail and truck into Washington state. Containers stacked 3 high, trains running double shifts, trucks lined up for miles. Today, those containers are being routed. Reports are coming in of cargo allocations shifting in real time. Ships flagged for potential United States transfer are being held in harbor for national security review. Trains that would normally head for Seattle are being redirected to the port of Prince Rupert, which ships directly to Asia. This isn't a blockade. Blockades are acts of war. This is bureaucratic jujitsu. Carney is using the exact same national security language Trump uses. He's just applying it to pause shipments of vital goods to the United States legally, quietly, precisely. Every container that doesn't cross the border today is a container that won't be on American shelves next month. Every ship that diverts to Asia is a supply chain relationship that just got rewritten permanently. And here's the part that's going to hurt. Once those relationships are rewritten, they don't rewrite back. You don't cancel a 10-year contract with Japan because Trump got bored and went back to attacking China. Japan plans in decades. Japan doesn't care about Trump's feelings. By the time the tariffs are removed, if they're ever removed, the contracts will be signed, the shipping lanes will be established, the customs relationships will be built. The United States will be standing at the door of an empty room wondering where all the furniture went. Receipt number 3, the phone call. Sources inside the State Department are leaking like a CIV right now. Career officials are terrified. Political appointees are panicking. Nobody knows what to do because nobody saw this coming. At 9:30 a.m., the United States Commerce Secretary placed a frantic call to Ottawa. The question was simple. Does the mineral pause include defense contractors? The answer from Ottawa was 7 words that just rewrote the North American security relationship. We are currently reviewing all export permits. That is diplomatic speak for we'll get back to you when we feel like it. Do you understand the power dynamic shift happening in that sentence? Usually, it's the United States making the threats and Canada checking the fine print. Usually, it's Washington setting the timeline and Ottawa waiting. Usually, the phone calls go from anxious Canadian ministers to condescending American officials. Today, the White House is sweating on the line, waiting for an operator to pick up, checking their watches, calculating how many hours of production they have left before the supply chain seizes. Lockheed Martin builds components that require Canadian minerals. General Dynamics builds vehicles that require Canadian aluminum. The F-35 program, the most expensive weapon system in human history, requires Canadian materials for specific subsystems. If those materials don't cross the border, production slows. If production slows, delivery dates slip. If delivery dates slip, contracts get renegotiated. If contracts get renegotiated, the entire defense industrial base starts looking for alternative suppliers. Alternative suppliers who don't answer their phones at 9:30 a.m. because they're in a different time zone or a different alliance system or a different geopolitical reality. This is how empires decline, not with a bang, with a phone call that doesn't get returned. Receipt number 4. The joint statement. While Trump was posting angry messages about ungrateful Canada and unfair subsidies and terrible trade deals, a joint statement was quietly released from Brussels and Ottawa. The President of the European Commission and Mark Carney issued a declaration of critical alliance. They didn't just shake hands. They signed a framework that integrates Canada's resource grid with Europe's industrial base. Read that sentence again. Canada's resources, Europe's factories, America's competitors. The framework includes provisions for joint research and development, for shared infrastructure investment, for streamlined customs between Canadian ports and European manufacturing hubs, for worker mobility and technology transfer, and all the boring bureaucratic details that actually make economies work. This proves Carney had this ready. He didn't write this plan this morning. He's been keeping this weapon under the desk since his first week in office, waiting for Trump to make a mistake big enough to justify using it. Trump crossed the line. Carney pulled the trigger. And now the bridge is burning. Why Trump is spiraling. Look at the frequency of the posts. Look at the capitalization. Look at the exclamation points. Trump is losing control because he only knows one game: leverage. His entire worldview is based on the assumption that America is the biggest room in the house, so everyone has to listen when he speaks. He thinks leverage is about size. He thinks because the United States economy is 10 times larger than Canada's, he wins by default. He thinks the numbers on the spreadsheet determine the outcome. That's 1980s thinking. That's real estate developer thinking. That's the logic of a man who has never encountered a situation where being bigger actually makes you more vulnerable. In the modern world, leverage isn't about size. It's about choke points. It's about who controls the narrow passages that everything else must flow through. It's about who owns the resources that cannot be substituted. It's about who can afford to wait. Trump just handed Carney the moral high ground and the economic trigger at the same time by threatening a 25% tariff. Trump violated the USMCA agreement. He broke the rules. He gave Canada the legal right to retaliate under international trade law. That's what Trump expected: a retaliatory tariff on bourbon or ketchup or Harley-Davidsons. The usual dance, the predictable escalation. Instead, Carney attacked the choke point. He didn't tax American goods. He redirected Canadian resources. He moved the conflict to a domain where Canada has the advantage and the United States has the vulnerability. Trump is reactive. He wakes up, watches Fox News, gets angry, and issues an order. He assumes the other side will panic. He assumes the sheer weight of the American market will crush resistance. But what happens when the other side doesn't panic? What happens when the other side is led by a guy who ran the Bank of England through Brexit, who ran the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis, who understands global capital flows better than Trump's, understands his own golf course irrigation? Carney isn't playing to the crowd. He's playing to the system. He's exploiting the gaps between the rules. He's using Trump's aggression as the justification for a strategic realignment that Canadian leaders have dreamed about for decades but never dared to attempt. Trump thought he was punishing a subordinate. Instead, he just threw a wrench into his own engine. And now that the engine is smoking, he doesn't know how to fix it because he fired all the mechanics. He drove away the experts. He surrounded himself with people who tell him he's winning. The Europeans are laughing. The Canadians are standing tall. The Japanese are signing contracts. And the American voter is about to wonder why their grocery bill just went up again. The terrifying competence of Mark Carney. Whatever you think of his politics, you have to admire the execution. This is not how Canadian prime ministers usually behave. Historically, the Canadian strategy has been keep your head down, smile politely, and hope the Americans don't notice you. Be helpful, be reliable, be the quiet neighbor who never complains. Carney has shredded that playbook. His move is different because it's asymmetric. Symmetric warfare is you slap me, I slap you. You tax my steel, I tax your bourbon. That's a losing game for Canada because the United States is bigger. Canada runs out of cheeks to slap. Canada doesn't have enough bourbon to retaliate with. Carney went asymmetric. He said, you tax my steel. Fine. I will starve your technology sector. He moved the conflict to a domain where Canada has the advantage. Canada has the resources the world needs for the green transition. Canada has the lithium for batteries, the cobalt for electronics, the uranium for nuclear power, the rare earth elements for defense systems. The United States is desperate for these resources to compete with China. The entire Biden industrial policy, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the whole infrastructure push depends on access to Canadian minerals. By locking those resources away in exclusive contracts with Europe and Japan, Carney is hitting Trump where he is weakest. In the industrial base that actually delivers jobs to swing states, it's also different because it's quiet. Notice the tone. Trump is loud. Carney is silent. Trump uses caps lock. Carney uses contracts. Trump holds rallies. Carney holds briefings with charts. There's a terrifying competence to what Ottawa is doing. They aren't burning flags. They aren't holding protests. They aren't even criticizing Trump directly. They're just quietly rooting the plumbing of the global economy to bypass the United States. This is a signal to the world. Carney is telling Europe, Japan, and the UK, America is unstable. We are stable. Do business with us. He is positioning Canada not as America's little brother, but as the adult alternative, the reliable partner, the country that honors contracts and respects alliances and doesn't wake up every morning wondering who to attack next. He is betting that the world is tired of the chaos coming out of Washington. And looking at the markets today, looking at the speed with which European leaders signed that framework, looking at the shipping manifest from Vancouver, he's right. He's turning pressure into power. He's taking Trump's aggression and using it as proof that Canada needs to be independent. He's solving Canada's decades-old problem of being too reliant on the United States by using Trump as the excuse to break away. It's brilliant and it's dangerous. The leaked memo. I have a source, not someone who was in the room, someone who knows someone who was in the room. The details are fragmentary, airy, but they're consistent enough to report. At 1:10 p.m. last night, a secure video call connected Ottawa, London, Berlin, Paris, and Tokyo. On the call, Carney's chief of staff, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, the German economics minister, and senior trade officials from France and Japan. The topic, what happens after the break? According to my source, the Canadian official laid out a timeline. 7 days to finalize the critical minerals framework, 14 days to sign the first bilateral contracts, 30 days to begin physical shipments to European ports. The European officials were described as cautiously enthusiastic. The Japanese official was described as already calculating shipping logistics. Nobody asked about the United States. Nobody mentioned the tariffs. Nobody expressed concern about Trump's reaction. It was as if the United States had already been factored out of the equation. As if the assumption of North American integration had simply been deleted. 7 days. That's the timeline. 7 days until the framework is finalized. 14 days until the contracts are signed. 30 days until the first shipments leave Canadian ports bound for Europe instead of America. 7 days. Count them. What this means for you? Maybe you're sitting in Ohio, maybe you're in Texas, maybe you're watching from Toronto or Calgary or Vancouver. Why does this matter to your life? If you are in the United States, this is a wake-up call. The era of cheap, easy access to Canadian resources is over. Trump just ended it, not through policy, through incompetence, through miscalculation, through assuming that size always wins. Prices are going to rise, not just for cars, for everything. Housing, lumber comes from Canada. 30% of America's softwood lumber comes from British Columbia and Quebec. If that supply gets redirected to Asia or Europe, home prices go up, construction slows, renovations become more expensive. Energy, oil comes from Canada. 4 million barrels a day cross the border. If those barrels start flowing east instead of south, gasoline prices go up, heating oil goes up, jet fuel goes up, food, fertilizer comes from Canada. Potash is essential for American agriculture. 60% of United States potash imports come from Saskatchewan. If that potash gets shipped to Brazil or India instead, crop yields decline. Food prices rise. If the standoff continues, if Carney holds the line and Trump doubles down, the inflation that Trump promised to fix is going to come roaring back, driven not by government spending or monetary policy, but by supply shocks from the north. The kind of inflation you can't fix with interest rates. The kind that just keeps coming because the stuff simply isn't there. But the bigger implication is about safety. For 70 years, the United States and Canada have been virtually a single security zone. NORAD, intelligence sharing, military integration. The border is the longest undefended frontier in the world. If Carney is willing to cut economic ties, if he's willing to redirect resources away from American defense contractors, how far does this go? Are we looking at a future where Canada stops sharing intelligence? Where the northern border becomes a hard border with customs checks and military patrols? Where the special relationship, the closest relationship between any two countries on Earth, simply ends? For Canadians, this is the moment of truth. This is the moment you find out if your country is sovereign or if it's a vassal state. If you can stand on your own 2 feet or if you need America's approval to exist, Carney is betting the farm. If he fails, if the European contracts fall through, if the Japanese lose interest, if the global economy slows, the Canadian economy crashes, the dollar collapses, unemployment spikes, and Carney becomes the most hated man in Canadian history. If he succeeds, Canada emerges as a true middle power independent of Washington, integrated with Europe and Asia, a resource superpower that supplies the building blocks of the 21st century to whoever pays the best. Globally, this signals the end of the North American fortress. The continent is cracking. Investors see it, generals see it, adversaries see it. When you break the trust between the United States and Canada, you break the foundation of Western security. You create a gap that other powers will exploit. You send a signal that the alliance structure of the post-war era is not permanent, that it depends on the mood of one man in Washington. And Trump is taking a king's sledgehammer to that foundation because he thinks it makes him look tough. The moment that captured everything. There was a moment during the press conference. A reporter asked Carney, "Mr. Prime Minister, aren't you afraid of provoking the president? What if he closes the border completely?" Carney stopped. He took off his glasses. He looked directly into the camera, not at the reporter, but at the lens, at you, at me, at everyone watching. And he said very quietly, "The border is a line on a map. The economy is a web of trust. The president can close the line, but he has already broken the trust. We are simply moving on." He put his glasses back on. He walked away. We are simply moving on. It wasn't a threat. It was a goodbye. The danger zone. Trump doesn't know how to lose. He doesn't have a mechanism for accepting that he made a mistake. His entire psychology is built around never admitting error, never backing down, never showing weakness. So what happens next? Scenario A, the fragile calm. Trump doubles down. He rages. He announces sanctions on individual Canadian officials. He tries to ban Canadian snowbirds from Florida. It gets petty. It gets personal. It gets embarrassing. But the markets force his hand. The S&P drops another 5%. Donors call, CEOs scream, factory owners in swing states start making layoff announcements. Trump carves out exemptions. He quietly removes the tariffs. He claims victory, says he fixed the deal, says he won, says Canada blinked, but the damage is done. Canada keeps its new contracts with Europe. The framework remains in place. The rooted supply chains don't reroute back. America gets a symbolic victory and a permanent loss. Scenario B, catastrophic escalation. Trump declares a national emergency. He orders the seizure of Canadian assets in United States jurisdiction. He tries to forcefully inspect every truck at the border. The border gridlocks, food rots, and trailers. Auto plants in Michigan shut down within 48 hours because they don't have parts. Layoffs ripple through the Midwest. Unemployment spikes. Foreclosures begin. Carney responds by freezing United States tech assets in Canada. American companies operating in Canada find their bank accounts inaccessible, their intellectual property locked, their employees unable to get paid. It becomes a full-blown economic Cold War, not with China, with Canada, with the country that shares your electricity grid and your intelligence network and your longest border. Investors flee both countries. The dollar weakens, the loonie collapses, the global economy stumbles, and somewhere in Beijing, they're watching and smiling and calculating exactly how to exploit the gap. Scenario C, the strategic reset. Trump realizes he stepped in a bear trap. He fires a scapegoat, blames the deep state for the tariff idea, tries to pivot to attacking China or Mexico instead, pretends the Canada fight never happened. Carney receives a phone call, not from Trump, from someone lower. Someone who says, "We need to fix this. What do you want?" Carney lists conditions, reaffirmation of the USMCA, guarantees of no future tariff threats, compensation for the market disruption, a commitment to negotiate critical minerals access as equals, not as supplicants. Trump agrees grudgingly, bitterly, with bad grace. The tariffs are removed. The contracts with Europe remain, but Canada agrees to maintain some supply to the United States. The crisis passes, but here's the problem with Scenario C. You can't unring the bell. The trust is broken. Carney isn't going to tear up those contracts just because Trump changed his mind. The European framework isn't going to dissolve because Trump got bored. The shipping lanes aren't going to revert because Trump claimed victory. The shift has happened. Canada has started looking east and west instead of just south. That orientation doesn't reverse. It compounds. It builds. It becomes the new normal. America has lost something it can never get back. The unquestioning loyalty of its northern neighbor. The countdown. 7 days until the European framework is finalized.